Hey, welcome back to our series on Adam Smith. Let's get into chapter 4. In this chapter, Adam Smith begins to analyze the origins and the uses of money. So he starts out by saying that once the division of labor is established, only a small portion of what a person consumes is a result of their own labor. Now, the majority of their possessions are the result of exchanging the surplus of their labor. Within this system, society now becomes a commercial society in which every man, in a sense, is a merchant. However, problems start to arise in the system of exchange. First, let's imagine that a milkman wants to trade his surplus milk for the bread man's surplus bread. He would only be able to get some bread if the bread man wants to exchange bread for milk. But if the bread man isn't in need or want of any milk, then the milkman is out of luck. As a result of these complications, people began to collect other kinds of commodities in case their own surplus wasn't sufficient. So if it turns out the bread guy doesn't want any milk anyway, maybe the milk guy has some salt or some cattle he can trade instead. This became a really common practice in developing societies throughout history. Salt in Abyssinia, shells in parts of India, tobacco in Virginia, and sugar in the West Indiana colonies. But still, this adjustment did not solve all the problems people were having. Many of these commodities were perishable, and they were not able to be divided without losing some of their value. For example, if you need to buy a loaf of bread, you can't go to your goat in the backyard and carve out a loaf of bread's worth of value from your goat without leaving the rest of your goat kind of dead and corpsey. So that might become an issue. Something that is not perishable and is able to be divided up is metal. Metal then began to be used by the Spartans, by the Romans, and all rich commercial nations as a means of exchange. However, this was not often as we imagine it. Usually the metal was traded in kind of rudimentary bars or chunks. These metals in their rude state was accompanied by a couple inconveniences. First, the big rudimentary bars were difficult for people to weigh. And second, it was difficult to determine the quality of the metal throughout. Basically, because it was a big bar, you would have to melt down the whole thing every time you want to see if you're getting paid what you actually need to get paid. This was just a huge inconvenience. So to address these issues, countries began to create coined money, which were stamped to ensure a certain weight and value within each coin. But then the real value of all these coins diminished insanely over time. Adam Smith said this is because the princes and the sovereign states would unjustly devalue their own currency before they paid off foreign debts. Then in the last part of this chapter, Adam Smith begins to discuss the meaning of value. He says value can have two meanings. Number one is the value and use of a particular object, or its utility. The second is an object's value in exchange. Value in use, value in exchange. The things which have the greatest value in use frequently have little or no value in exchange. And, on the contrary, those which have the greatest value in exchange frequently have little or no value in use. A good example of this is water and gold. Water is essential to human life, and we need it all the time. But its exchange value is next to nothing. And gold, on the other hand, has pretty little practical use. Besides maybe wearing it, but that's not really practical. But look at its exchange value. It's high. Adam Smith concludes this chapter by saying he's going to continue in the next chapter by telling us what is the source of exchangeable value. Stay tuned.